Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, ALBA-TC, held a high-level video conference this Wednesday. The US House of Representatives held a hearing on policing practices and law enforcement accountability in the midst of the protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd. Dozens of protesters rallied in Sudan against a newly formed United Nations mission to help support the country's political transition. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, ALBA-TC, held a high-level video conference this Wednesday on the global economic, finance and trade in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The conference was convened by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Leaders of ALBA member states discussed the economic challenges faced by the Latin American and Caribbean region due to the novel coronavirus pandemic. Alicia Barcenas, Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for the region, warned that the COVID-19 pandemic is set to generate increasing unemployment, poverty and inequality. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel denounced the ongoing unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States against the island and Venezuela. He also recalled that 34 Cuban medical brigades were deployed to 26 countries to fight the coronavirus. Leaders of small Caribbean states expressed their gratitude for the solidarity provided by Cuba and Venezuela. Meanwhile, a 10-point agenda to respond to the global economic crisis was presented. The event ended with a call for unity, solidarity and cooperation. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, speaking during the ALBA video conference, highlighted the importance of economic initiatives such as Petrocaribe, the ALBA Bank and the Sucre currency to address the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We have seen the creation of Petrocaribe, and we have promised and are committed to reviving Petrocaribe this year. We have already discussed how the steps and methods to do so. We are doing everything in order to create the ALBA Bank to collaborate with the revival of our post-pandemic economies. We took a wonderful step, which must be resumed with the creation of the Sucre for currency exchange and trade promotion. Currency exchange that is based on the local currency of each country, but it is also a great way of promoting trade.
Alicia Barcenas, Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, resumed the possible social impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in the region.
The social impact is going to be very, very dire. Almost 12 million people are going to be unemployed, giving a total of 38 million, at least. In truth, we will have an extreme poverty that's going to increase, as well as poverty is going to increase in the area. 83.5 million people at least are going to be found in these situations. So we are proposing from CEPAL a basic income to try to avoid this situation, so that people will have the necessary means to reach ends meet.
And Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel also highlighted the socio-economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Latin American and Caribbean region.
By the end of 2020, we can foresee a drop of 20% in the economic activity in Latin America, with very bad repercussions in the social sector. Poverty rate will go up 4.4%, and extreme poverty will go up 2.6% in regards to 2019. We can see that poverty in Latin America is going to be the most in the whole world. 47 million people in the region are going to be in a state of poverty, and 86 million people are going to be in extreme poverty.
Spanish academic and journalist Ignacio Ramonet referred to the current global crisis sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic. He explained the existence of three stages, the first being the health crisis, the second the economic crisis, and the third the social and political crisis.
There's no doubt that the pandemic, it's just a phase of the general crisis. This crisis has three stages. To my opinion, the health time, it's the time that have been brought up in time of the pandemic, the economic time, with all the economic consequences that the pandemic brings along, and the lockdown and all the measures that have been taken to fight against the pandemic. And the third stage, that is the political and social time. So there is three times: health, economical, and social political. Elections, social movements. In the United States in particular, they are right on the third time. They have the health crisis, they have the economic crisis, in particular the massive unemployment and the social crisis with these massive protests.
The Puebla group, made up of progressive Latin American leaders, has flagged concerns that the evidence offered by the Organization of American States to claim that there was fraud in Bolivia's November elections was flawed. The group described the OAS actions as despicable, stressing that the international community would have to assume that the multilateral organization acted as an accomplice in overthrowing a democratic government, as the report it released indicated fraud was used as justification by those who launched a coup against the Evo Morales government. The Puebla group therefore called on the OAS to appoint an independent commission to clarify the issues pointed out by independent researchers who found that the organization's statistical analysis of the elections was itself flawed. Furthermore, the de facto government is urged to immediately return state power and stop delaying the country's elections. Brazil has officially reported the third highest number of COVID-19 deaths in the world, surpassed only by the United Kingdom and the United States. The South American country has now confirmed over 38,000 COVID-19 fatalities. Brazil has also reported the second highest number of confirmed cases in the world at over 700,000. Meanwhile, the United States remains the worst affected by the pandemic, with more than 114,000 fatalities and over 2 million cases. Shopping malls across Uruguay have reopened under strict health and safety guidelines, such as mandatory mask wearing and social distancing, while all items touched by customers must be immediately disinfected.
Today, 9,000 people who were on unemployment compensation entered the job market. And I think this is a very important thing, because sometimes when it comes to shopping, the first thing that people think about is commercial activity and the frivolity of it. But you have to think that thanks to this activity, there are a lot of people who work.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The United States House of Representatives this Wednesday held a hearing on policing practices and law enforcement accountability in the midst of the protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd. The first congressional hearing since the incident, called by the House Committee on the Judiciary, began with testimony from George's brother, Philonis Floyd, who called to honour George and make the necessary changes to ensure that law enforcement is the solution and not the problem. Legal experts and police officials also offered their testimony. The hearing sets the stage for a debate later this month on the sweeping police reform bill that Democrats unveiled on Monday. The European Union has advised its member states to allow international travellers from July 1st.
Of temporary travel restrictions at external borders will come at the second stage. And in this respect, later this week, the College will adopt its assessment of travel restrictions and will put forward an approach for the gradual and partial lifting of these restrictions as of the 1st of July, with certain third countries taking into account a number of principles and criteria and based on a common coordinated approach by member states supported by the Commission.
Austria has decided to open its borders to its European neighbours except for Spain, Portugal, Sweden and the United Kingdom, as the country maintains low cases of the novel coronavirus. Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg said this will take effect from midnight June 15th. He also said people will no longer be required to undergo a 2-week quarantine on arrival. Schallenberg added that Austria's southern border with Italy would be open without conditions, but that a travel warning remains in place for the Lombardy region.
We have agreed today at the round table that by the end of June 15, so midnight from June 15 to June 16, a total of 31 countries will have their corona restriction on entry lifted. That is 14 days home quarantine or corona test.
In Italy, the NGO Mediterranean Saving Humans has announced the Mare Jonio vessel will soon return to the Mediterranean Sea to rescue migrants.
We are pulling anchor. We are leaving the port of Trapani for a new mission. After many months of sequestration and then COVID-19, which forced us to stay in port. We are returning to the central Mediterranean to observe the situation and to denounce the terrible human rights violations that continue to occur here.
Germany has extended its travel restrictions for people from non-European countries until the end of August, but will lift border controls to all its neighbours by mid-June. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas says Germany does not have systems to assess and coordinate travel without risks. The country had already announced it would lift a blanket travel ban for EU members and neighbouring countries from June 15th, opening the path to separate travel advice for individual regions. However, authorities could reconsider the move if the coronavirus crisis worsens. Swedish prosecutors have announced the closure of an investigation into the murder of Prime Minister Olof Palme 34 years ago, as their main suspect is now dead. Palme was killed on February 28, 1986, while walking home from a Stockholm cinema with his wife. His bodyguards had already been relieved of duties for the evening. More than 10,000 people have been questioned over the years, and 134 confessed to the crime. But the main suspect, Stig Ekström, known for his opposition to Palme's left-wing policies, died in 2000. South Korea has recommitted to upholding all agreements with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and further announced legal action against 2 groups that sent hostile propaganda to its neighbour. According to the Ministry of Unification, the government will sue the 2 activist groups for violating the cooperation agreement and inter-Korean exchanges. Their operating licence will also be seized. Seoul is seeking to find a solution to the new tensions with North Korea, which as of Tuesday cut off all communication in response to the propaganda.
The government decided that the 2 organizations violated the public interest by creating tensions between the South and North and brought danger to lives and safety of residents in border areas by violating the regulation of trade and transportation of goods under the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act and squarely violating the agreement between the leaders of the 2 Koreas.
China has removed pangolin parts from its official list of traditional medicines days after increasing legal protections for the endangered animal. Pangolins were left out of the official Chinese pharmacopoeia this year, along with substances including a pill formulated with bat feces. The pangolin, the world's most heavily trafficked animal, is thought by some scientists to be the possible host of the novel coronavirus that emerged at a market in China's Wuhan city last year. China has in recent months banned the sale of wild animals for food, citing the risk of diseases spreading to humans, but the trade remains legal for other purposes, including research and traditional medicine. Tokyo 2020 organisers say they have agreed with the International Olympic Committee to tone down the postponed Olympic Games, adding that cancelling them is not up for discussion.
We never discussed that possibility. We never discussed it. Our stance is basically that we want to maintain the competition and the schedule as planned for 2020, even though the Games are being held in 2021. Based on this stance, we are discussing matters with those concerned.
And we're taking one last short break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Dozens of Sudanese protesters rallied in Khartoum this Wednesday against a newly formed United Nations mission to help support the country's political transition following the ouster of ex-president Omar al-Bashir. Demonstrators marched near the military headquarters, rejecting the UN intervention in the country's domestic affairs. Security forces were deployed and fired tear gas to disperse the crowd while blocking roads leading to the military's high command. The UN Security Council last week approved the establishment of the Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan, tasked with supporting the country's transition to democratic rule.
We took to the streets to topple this puppet government that wants to bring international UN forces to Sudan. We have the army and the Sudanese people are plentiful. Why do they want international UN forces? We are here for our bread and our fuel. We have not been able to eat, drink, or move for 3 or 4 months. It is better to let the police kill us than to die in our homes.
Ongoing protests over the killing of a Palestinian youth by Israeli police have been met with repression. Iyad Halik, who was shot and killed in Jerusalem on May 30th, was autistic and unable to understand the orders of Israeli police, who chased him before shooting. The brutal killings of Palestinians by the Zionist Israeli regime have been compared to the murder of African Americans by white supremacists. Demonstrators are seeking support from human rights organizations to hold Israel accountable for its crimes. Burundi has begun 1 week of mourning following the death of President Pierre Nkurunziza. Senior government officials, foreign ambassadors and religious leaders lined up to sign a condolence book at the presidential palace while observing coronavirus regulations. Nkurunziza was expected to finish his 3rd term in office this August, to be succeeded by Evariste Ndayishimiye. The president died from a heart attack on Tuesday, was Burundi's longest-serving leader at 15 years. Iran has reiterated its call for European countries to restore the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iran Nuclear Deal. The Parliament's Special Assistant for International Affairs said Tehran needs a strong stance from the so-called E3 group, made up of the United Kingdom, France and Germany, against the obstacles imposed by the United States on the delivery of humanitarian supplies to the country. He also called on the French ambassador to Iran to oppose Washington's punitive measures. And Iran's president has urged members of the UN Security Council, especially veto-wielding China and Russia, to oppose a US conspiracy that seeks to extend a permanent arms blockade on the Islamic Republic.
We will reach a point when, based on Resolution 2231, all arms embargoes on Iran would be lifted, and the Americans are already angry and upset, and are preparing resolutions and want to bring them to the Security Council. We expect these 4 permanent members to stand against this conspiracy for global interest, global stability. We especially expect this from our 2 friendly countries, Russia and China.
Iranian member of the parliament, Soraya Elihan, has called on the intelligence minister to release a comprehensive report on the investigation into the murder of General Qasem Soleimani. The lawmaker also asked the Minister of Intelligence, Sayed Mohammed Alavi, to explain about the measures and follow-up taken by the ministry regarding the assassination by the US military forces. Iran's top military general, Qasem Soleimani, and his comrades were assassinated in Baghdad International Airport on January 3, 2020, on the orders of US President Donald Trump. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.